Back on February 29, 2016, the Minecraft community split into two for the first time. That was when the first end update dropped, though for some reason the developers decided to call it the combat update instead. At that point, combat in Minecraft changed from this to this. Which of these two mechanics is better, it's hard to say, but as far as I'm concerned, they both have their downsides. In any case, the Minecraft community is still arguing about this. Some people refuse on principle to play the minigames in the newer versions, precisely because you can't spam click. That is exactly why, way back in 2019, goodness me, it's been 7 years already, Jeb single-handedly decided to overhaul the combat system in Minecraft and began developing what was known as the second combat update. Over the course of a whole year of development, 12 different snapshots were released, each of which improved the Minecraft combat system or certain aspects of it to a greater or a lesser extent. The strangest thing is that these snapshots weren't available via the official launcher. They appeared separately on Reddit. To install them, you had to download the archive from Jeb's post, navigate to the local folder where all versions of Minecraft for the launcher are stored, create a folder, name it after the snapshot, move all the files from the archive into the folder, open the launcher, and only then would the combat snapshot appear in the menu alongside all the official snapshots. Why go to all the trouble just for a snapshot? According to Jens, these snapshots were experimental forks of already released versions, separate from the main update branch, so as not to confuse casual players and to receive feedback only from those who consciously download and install such test builds themselves. That makes sense, but now third-party launchers allow you to download all experimental versions without any issues right as a new version is released. What's more, Minecraft has officially introduced experiments where such snapshots are uploaded. So what was added in these combat snapshots, and how did it all turn out? But most importantly, when can we expect the continuation and the release of the so-called second combat update? Let's find out together. First off, Jens changed the attack range, or rather he improved it slightly. All swords still had a range of 3 blocks, but the range also depended on how full the cooldown charge was. If you struck an enemy without waiting for the cooldown, the range decreased. If the player and the target were standing still, but the player kept striking the target, their attacks simply wouldn't reach. Other types of weapons have also been changed. The range of the trident and the hoe has increased from 3 to 3.5 blocks. This is because the trident is longer than a standard sword, but I don't understand what connection there is with the hoe. On the other hand, the attack range of the axe, pickaxe and shovel has decreased to 2.5 blocks. This is quite weird, considering that the hoe is, so to speak, a shortened pickaxe, and they are identical in length. With the release of the Mounts of Mayhem update, which introduced spears, the developers decided to revisit the issue of attack range. As a result, the spear's attack range is variable, depending on the attack, ranging from the minimum of 2 blocks to a maximum of 4.5, which is currently the maximum. Generally speaking, the attack range in standard Minecraft is just 3 blocks, which is almost as close as your hand. Something you'll agree is strange. So Jeb decided to take it a step further and reduce the hand's attack range to 2.5 blocks. In addition, all tools and weapons now display an attack range number in tooltips, except for those with a range of exactly 2.5 blocks. There were also various adjustments to damage and attack speed for each tool and weapon. Overall, there weren't any particular significant changes. Mainly, damage increased by half a hertz and attack speed became twice as fast. In this update, Jeb has completely overhauled health regeneration. How does health regeneration work now? The game features both satiation and hunger. Unfortunately, and this really gets me down, vanilla Minecraft doesn't display the satiation bar. With the help of the legendary Apple Skin mod, you can see the satiation bar in-game. Initially, the game consumes it, and only later does it start using hunger. However, the player's health does not regenerate until the entire satiation and hunger bar is filled. Only then does the game begin to convert satiation into health and later hunger itself. Regeneration occurred every 4 seconds. In combat snapshots, the game stopped taking satiation into account and immediately switched to hunger. Regeneration did not begin when the player filled the entire satiation bar, but as soon as it reached 4 units. Moreover, the regeneration ratio was 1:1. Half a satiation bar restored half a heart. What's more, healing occurred every 2 seconds, not every 4. In other words, this change was a huge help during battle, when you could eat a little food and immediately start started to rapid regeneration process. But there is one but. When taking damage from a mob or another player, the process of consuming food and drink is interrupted and reset. What's more, the consumption of various liquids, honey, milk, potions has been sped up. It used to take about 1.5 seconds and now it takes just 1 second. In one of the snapshots, Jeb even decided to remove the running restrictions while you're hungry, but not everyone liked that, so he dropped the idea. One of the nice bonuses was that all types of potions, except splash and lingering potions, could be stacked up to 16 at a time, which gave a significant advantage in combat and, at the very least, made it easier to take a track on your entire inventory. The same applied to snowballs. Instead of 16 in a single stack, you could now hold 64 at once. At the same time, for the first time in the snapshot, Jeb decided to fix the issue of projectiles flying straight off the screen. Before this snapshot, they would fly straight out of the player's head, and if it thrown frequently, they would appear to flicker, causing discomfort. Jeb decided to fix this, and projectile would render after a few ticks. This solved the problem, but players like it so much that it was carried over into the full version of Minecraft. On top of that, all projectiles also gain a cooldown time, similar to Ender Pearls, though not quite as long. Jeb also redesigned the shields. Now they could block up to 5 points of damage, but he also had the idea of adding different shields and upgrades for them. So he decided to experiment a bit with the customization, and shields with banners on them, yes, in case anyone doesn't know, you can add banners to shields even in regular Minecraft, could block up to 10 points of damage. That said, if a player's weapon had the Knockback enchantment, the shield wouldn't block it 100%, only 50%, which might not seem like much, but the players would still be knocked back after being hit. There were, of course, some questionable changes, such as shields not blocking explosions if they were caused by a player. However, Jeb removed the activation delay. It was only 5 game ticks, but even that brief moment could save a player. This one surprised Bedrock players, but in Java, they added the ability to block attacks by crouching. This could be enabled or disabled in the game settings. Of course, this was added as a part of parity between versions. In many ways, this was handy, as it became possible to strike enemies even whilst the shield was active, though you couldn't perform a maximum 200% attack. We'll discuss that a bit later. In addition, a shield indicator appeared. After striking with an axe, the shield lowers and cannot be raised for a short time, just as in standard Minecraft. But in this update, an indicator appeared in the form of an icon next to the hotbar, or directly below the crosshair. This could also be disabled. To add a bit of variety to combat, Jeb came up with a unique enchantment for the axe, Cleaving. It worked much like a sharpness, but specifically for the axe. There were only 3 levels of enchantment, and if you dealt critical damage with a netherite axe with the highest level of enchantment, you could take down a full 9 hearts. At the same time, the stun effect lasted 1.5 seconds. Jeb also made it possible to apply other enchantments to axe, looting, knockback, and fire aspect. Since we're on the subject of enchantments, I'll mention that some of the older ones have been improved. For example, a trident enchantment with loyalty would return to its owner even after being thrown into the void. Like in the second season of SMP, I accidentally threw one in there, and it didn't come back to me. That was a bummer. I still don't understand why they haven't added a similar feature to regular Minecraft. Then, the Impaling enchantment started dealing damage not only to water mobs, but also to those who were in water or in the rain. That's a great improvement too. It's strange why it hasn't made its way into regular Minecraft either. The Sweeping H enchantment has also undergone a slight change. In this update, Jeff decided that the Sweeping Strike effect is a unique feature of this particular enchantment. Consequently, it could not be activated without the enchantment or a 200% charge. How does it work now? If the player is standing still or moving slowly and the cooldown charge is more than 85% full, a Sweeping Strike will be performed, which can deal damage to all nearby enemies. In this update, this works with the Sweeping H enchantment that increases the damage from the Sweeping Strike. The strike can even be landed not on the target itself, but between them, with damage dealt to each target. This same enchantment could even be used on X. Jeb has been improved and now even includes a vertical knockback. This means that if an enemy is in the air, you can strike them with a blow that will knock them even higher. This is best seen when using the slow falling effect. There were also changes affecting the crossbow, bow, and arrows. For example, arrows no longer have damage immunity. This is when after taking any damage, mob turn red for a short period of time. During this time, any further damage dealt will not count. From this, we can conclude that a crossbow with a multi-shot enchantment can deal damage to a single mob with 3 arrows arrows at once. The bow in turn has received its own improvements. For example, shooting inaccuracy has been reduced from 1 unit to 0.25, which has increased accuracy and reduced randomness. However, a fatigue mechanic has also been added. If you hold the bow drawn for too long, it starts to shake and accuracy decreases. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Yes, in the new Mounts of Mayhem update, the spear has not only gained increased attack range but also fatigue. The spear also starts to shake if you hold it for too long. Of course, the main change concerns the cooldown charge. Instead of 100% charge, there is now a 200% charge. At the same time, you can deal damage to an enemy without even waiting for the cooldown charge to finish. It's just that at the moment, the attack will deal less damage to an enemy. In other words, roughly speaking, that very spam clicking of enemies has returned, just in different form. So why 200%? If the player waits for the charge to reach 200%, they will be able to land that very sweeping H, deal critical damage and knock the enemy further back if they hit from a running start. What's more, the cooldown no longer resets when switching items in hands, only after dealing damage. In other words, this is the compromise Jeb was able to find for two camps of PvP enthusiasts. A nice bonus that should also make its way into the standard version of Minecraft is the ability to strike through the tall grass. It's an absolute must-have. At the moment, you can't deal damage through the tall grass. It's so stupid, and it's incredibly frustrating. This update includes that option, and it's simply brilliant. To ensure everyone could experience every aspect of this update, Mojang even created a special combat map for the Java edition of the game. It was free and was released alongside every new versions of the combat snapshot. It was very handy. You could choose weapons and tools, enter various arenas to test combat against different mobs, and so on. So what's the story? I've tried to cover only the most significant new features and changes, but there were also smaller fixes and improvements. If you're interested, you can find the full list of changes via the link in the description. So what's the situation with these snapshots in 2026? After all, everything that's being added could easily pass for the current size of the drop. To be honest, it's all rather disappointing. The timeline of events is roughly as follows. On June 10th, 2021, on the official Minecraft Discord, a developer going by the nickname Ulraf hosted a Q&A session. When asked, "What do you think about combat snapshots?" he replied directly, "I'm very excited to pick up work on the combat snapshots. I had a few talks on it with Jeb, and I think there is definitely more can we do there. I'm really excited to work on it together with the community to make it the best it can be." So we can conclude that a year after the last snapshot, Ulraf has taken over development. The community took this in their stride and set about waiting. In January 2022, another developer, this time King Bdux, creator of the mod Aether and the Warden mob, shed some light on Ulraf's post. He explained that development will be handled not only by Ulraf but also by other developers, though they would not be starting work on it anytime soon. The development team will start work on the combat snapshots, but they do not yet have an exact date. Again, the problem here is that there are no clear specifics regarding the development. Will this be a full-scale update, or will it be the same experimental snapshots once more? For a full 3 years after that, everyone seems to be pretending that combat snapshot didn't exist, as if no one had ever created them, until Ulraf himself began talking about the future combat snapshots during a stream. He stated that one of the game design teams had taken over development. However, he did not specify whether this involved developing new snapshots or integrating everything into a separate combat update or a combat drop. Unfortunately, he remained silent on this point. He also stated that no one of the old code written by Jeb will be used. Instead of a literal port of the code, the developers will take the best ideas from it and re-implement them. In other words, it's safe to say that not everything added to the combat snapshots will make it into the full version. Ulraf said he liked all the changes relating to access. This includes the cleaving enchantment. He'd like to keep them. What about striking through grass and leaves? He put it that this is a general improvement, and it could be easily appear even outside the scope of the combat update, because it's simply convenient. I truly agree, it really is very convenient. So when can we expect the release? Or at least the first snapshots? Ulraf's response was rather vague. The release date is still a long way off. It's all very hard to make sense of. If he claims that the game design team have taken over development, does that mean it's already being developed? Or that the team has made a commitment and will eventually start working on all of this? He noted that once work resumes, snapshots won't be released as separate updates, but in some other way, more likely as a separate experimental features toggle, similar to the current Minecarts or Redstone update. The topic of combat in the game is a very sensitive one. At the very least, we still have the Bedrock edition of the game, in which the combat mechanics haven't changed at all. They're the same as they were before in the combat update, and I still don't understand why they haven't been updated, given that over the last few years, the Java and Bedrock edition development teams have been trying to create parity between the versions. They've overlooked the key points that actually relate to the game's combat mechanics. Perhaps we should expect the combat update as early as next year. I hope that this delay, or whatever you want to call it, will ultimately be for the best, and that we'll ended up seeing something worthwhile. Of course, Jeb snapshots aren't a godsend. They aren't perfect, but as the community feedback showed, development was moving in the right direction, and many were satisfied. What do you think about this? If you were in the developer's shoes, what would you change, or conversely remove from the combat mechanics? Please don't mention the cooldown charge, that's obvious enough. I'd be interested to read your thoughts. While you're waiting for the next video, check out these ones, they're just as interesting. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, smash that like button and hit the notification bell. See you soon, because we're discovering Minecraft in a whole new way.